right, well, it's 8:01, so let's go ahead and get started. We want to honor your time and you as busy nonprofit folks to make the most of this hour that we have together. We're going to welcome you all. I'm Hillary Watson. I work at NEW, and my colleague Ananya is here co-hosting. So if you have any technical issues this morning, you can reach out to Ananya in the chat. And I want to invite you to introduce yourself. You just want to share your name in the chat box and what organization you're affiliated with. You're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. As we get started this morning, let's see, other housekeeping details, Ananya?
About the recording?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I knew I was missing something. So we are recording this morning's session. We'll record through the conversation and presentation with Tony and Pam. And then when we open up for broader conversation, we want to honor you all in creating this space as a space where you can share things that you're wrestling with in a confidential way. So at that point, when we open up the conversation, we'll stop the recording. So just wanted to let you all know that. And just by way of introduction, I have a few slides to share with you all. So you are in Leading and Learning COVID, the nonprofit landscape 1 year later. If you thought you were going somewhere else, here we are. Welcome. And we're very excited to have to be partnering with United Way and the YMCA this morning. And if you're not familiar with NEW's work, NEW inspires and equips mission-driven people, organizations, and communities to realize their visions of a just and thriving society. And so that is the spirit in which we engage our work this morning. And really, the Leading and Learning series emerged first just about a year ago as a way to process for nonprofit leaders the advent of the pandemic and how you all were processing and responding to the different threads and pressures that the pandemic was tugging for you. So we put a pause on the program last summer and wanted to reintroduce it this year with these goals in mind as a space to increase network connectedness of nonprofit leaders, to give you all an opportunity for more connection, to build trust and partnership, especially during a crisis, to provide wisdom, resources, and support that respond to where you all are at right now, how nonprofits are responding, both pandemic response and other operations, teams, programming questions that you're working through. And lastly, to create an environment for participants to share actionable ideas and the ways that you've strengthened your organizations during the pandemic and during other significant shifts. So with that in mind, we want to just recognize a few norms as we step into this space. What we are hoping for, we do commit to starting on time and ending on time. In this Zoom world, want to acknowledge the self-care and the work life that's happening at the same time in the same place. This is a dialogical space, so recognizing that you can move up and move back. If you're a talker, recognize when you're talking. If you're a quiet person, think about when you might want to talk. A couple of these that I do want to highlight: the confidentiality. This is a space nonprofit leaders have a lot going on. And so we want to create a confidential space for you that really allows for trust building and allows for you to think about difficult things and how we can support each other in difficult times. And that we're focused on a common goal. We as a nonprofit sector are working towards human flourishing, toward a better world. So wherever we're coming from, thinking through focusing on that common goal. And that this is a space for heart-centered listening and sharing, that we offer some expertise and wisdom to give us a starting point, but this is a conversation space. And this is a space where we connect at a heart level. And we are excited to have our two presenters this morning, Tony Kayumi from the YMCA and Pam Smith from United Way. So just to get us started, I will share a little bit. Tony Kayumi is the president and CEO of the Ann Arbor YMCA, which strengthens Washtenaw and Southern Livingston counties through youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. She is also the chair of YMCA of the USA's Diversity, Inclusion, Global Multicultural Development Leadership Council and Asian Pacific Islander Leadership Network. And Pamela Smith has been the president CEO of the United Way of Washtenaw County since 2012. As a nonprofit executive, she is dedicated to strengthening the community through philanthropy, collaboration, and community engagement. So thank you all for introducing yourself in the chat box. It's wonderful to have a little space to get to know you. And as we get started this morning, we'll have some conversation with Pam and Tony to think through what this past year has been like for them. And then we'll move into a time of conversation. So just to get us started, one of the things I discovered after I asked Pam and Tony to participate with us this morning is that they actually know each other quite well and have a number of partnerships. So we're happy to have this as a new collaborative space for you all to talk and reflect. And to get us started, I want to remember, maybe just pause and recognize how many times we have used the word pivot in the past year, and the words radical reimagining. We've heard these phrases a lot, and so I'm curious, Pam and Tony, for you, what have you radically reimagined, and what are you still in the process of radically reimagining?
Well, when we were ordered closed by executive order for over half a year, we definitely had to radically reimagine. When your main facility, 85,000 square feet of it, is closed to the public, that normally sees thousands of people coming in every day, you have to rethink, how are you still going to continue to serve your community while following all of the health department restrictions? And so one of the things that we decided to start to do almost immediately, like within the first week of the Stay Home, Stay Safe shutdown, was to continue to provide child care services as a coronavirus crisis center. So one of our child care centers happens to be conveniently located on Glacier Hills Senior Retirement Community Campus, which is near St. Joe Hospital. And so we were given permission to remain open to serve the families of medical personnel, first responders, senior living community employees. And so that child care center never shut down, that stayed open. So those individuals could serve those most in need during the coronavirus crisis. And so the families that normally came there, some of them were still there because they were the kids of employees at Glacier Hills, but many new families who we had never met before began to take advantage of the services so they could go to work. And then there was also the aspect of so many people not being at work. And so they weren't earning the money they normally earn to put groceries on the table. So how could we help with that? We had the opportunity to partner with USDA's Farmers to Family Food Box program. So May through October, we distributed about 900 to 1,000 boxes of produce a week at 15 different locations in Washtenaw County. Each of those boxes weighed 25 pounds and contained fresh fruit and vegetables. So again, we had the opportunity to see some of the families we used to serve when they could come into the building by seeing them out in community, and also being able to meet new families we had never met before. So those are some of the radically reimagining how you can serve community when you're under restrictions that normally prevent you from doing what you would actually do on a day-to-day basis. And we've decided that some of those things we don't ever want to give up now that we've tried them. And so we are going to do our best to continue to feed in the future and to reimagine who we are as an organization, since so many kids are with us on a daily basis, making sure that those kids aren't hungry when they're here, and that when they go home for the weekend, that they have some food to take home as well.
That's wonderful. Pam, how have you been radically reimagining?
Thank you, Tony. I just thought all of those boxes of food at 25 pounds a piece, you guys built in physical fitness right into your program by like lifting all those boxes a million times. So
I had some great looking arms this summer, you know, because that's what we were doing. The staff was constantly lifting and unloading all that produce.
I should have volunteered for that. I need a workout. Well, I think for us, crisis was the mother of invention, and we had always had think disruptively up on our boards and stuff around, because we had really dived into a lot of different social justice and equity work about 2 years prior. But what we found through COVID is that there was a tremendous pressure of needs in the community, and we had to act faster than we had ever acted before. And so radically reimagining, I think right now we are radically reimagining what the nonprofit future could look like. I heard a presentation from the Johnson Center for Philanthropy recently. It was a really good presentation, and they compared the 2008 recession to now, not so much as what the similarities were, but there was definitely a rhyme to history where nonprofits did fine during the actual heat, you know, of the crisis, but they had a fallout in the the second and third year following that crisis. And so the Johnson Center kind of extrapolated that and said, what we're looking at now is the possibility that 1 in 6 nonprofits could fail in the next 2 years. And so we took that internally as well. So we wanted to not only as a United Way build this community network of support, but we also want to help build capacity of nonprofits to make sure that their needs are, you know, we're not only hearing them, but acting on them. So we're reimagining, and we did this with our COVID dollars, is turning everything into just general operating grants. It's like, let's put the power with the agencies so they can decide where to best put that money. And then we're reimagining, we're continuing to reimagine our funding. So how do we provide stability, but still be nuanced and flexible? Throughout COVID, what we raised over $1 million in 4 weeks. So we know that our process, our internal processes work to raise those dollars. But then, it's a great testament to the ability of our staff. We turned those dollars around and put them right back out into community in the next 4 weeks, which required a great deal of effort and time, not only on behalf of the staff, but the volunteers as well. And then we're radically reimagining our internal future. So if we can see what's possible during the pandemic of how flexible and quick we were able to respond, perhaps, you know, we need to look at how funding works, and tying things up for 2 and 3 years might not be the best thing to do, because if somebody, especially like right now, if somebody's doing something they did 3 years ago, it might not be meeting the needs of the community. So we really just want to be careful as far as understanding we need to move quickly, but not move too quickly, right? And lose some of the things that have made us so successful over our past 100 years. So.
I love that, Pam. And what I hear you saying in that too is seeing in a new light this challenge to think about closing our doors as nonprofits, and to think about if we're really trying to realize our visions, and if we really are working ourselves out of a job, what are the lasting ways that we create structures and impact?
We were one of the organizations that was fortunate to receive funding from the United Way during the pandemic, and it allowed us to do so many things that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Needless to say, when you're shut down for half a year, our revenue stream is not what it used to be by any means with the building closure. However, that funding allowed us to do things like start learning labs with so many of our schools in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti being closed and only offering virtual learning opportunities. Essential employees still needed to go to work, and there needed to be a place for their kids to have adult supervision, internet access, and light academic support. And the type of operational funding that the United Way was providing allowed us to open a learning lab in Ypsilanti Township and one in Ann Arbor to be able to serve those families so they could go to work, provide for their kids, and those children could have the help that they needed to remain academically successful. So I just wanted to, from the nonprofit standpoint, say how grateful we are for the United Ways and other foundations rethinking of how they provide contributions to nonprofit organizations, because they truly were lifesavers in this time of challenge.
Thanks, Tony. I want to take us a little bit of a different direction, because COVID wasn't the only thing happening in the past year. 2020 was called many times a year of racial reckoning. And I'm interested in, as nonprofits, as we have started to recognize that the roots of our sector are really in racism and in white savior complex and paternalism, and a need to respond to the racist systems that white institutions perpetuated. How are you thinking about equity right now, and how has that played into your radical reimagining? What does it mean to be bold in advocating for justice? And how has that boldness worked out for you? Has there been consequences? Has there been surprises? Pam, do you want to start with this one? Oh, Pam, you're on mute.
If I had $1 for every time somebody said that, I could fund a whole nother program. So I think for me, the boldest part for me in pursuing social justice and equity work was recognizing my own white fragility, was recognizing my own bias, my own ignorance, and then really stepping up and taking responsibility for my own learning. I've always been an avid reader. And so every time I would hear something, a phrase I didn't know or whatever, I'd start to read about it. And actually that's how I stumbled across the first 21-day equity challenge that was done by Food Solutions Network out of the Boston area. And I signed up for it, and it was 21 days of learning, and they were so gracious in making it open source. They said, take whatever you'd want, make it your own. And then the YWCA actually in Cleveland did one, and I took it again, and they had changed it a bit to mirror their community, and I learned so much more. And I came back to a group of local nonprofit leaders and community leaders, and I was like, that had gotten together on a regular basis to talk about equity, and I was like, I am bringing this, to Washtenaw County. It's really going to make a difference. And it plays into the profile of Washtenaw County in that we are terribly racially divided, economically segregated, but yet as the most educated city in America, we were also like, you're never the smartest person in the room, right? There's always someone with at least 2 PhDs. And so the beauty of this 21-day equity challenge is it gave people on-ramps for learning privately. So they could go on their computer and they could dive into all these different topics that they might not have known about. And the reason that was so important is because people are more likely to enter into conversations if they feel more informed and not scared to start talking about it. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Tony because she's amazing in the world of equity, but and her work is international. So I'll turn it over to Tony.
Thanks, Pam. And we had the honor of co-sponsoring the United Way's 21-day equity challenge as well, and thought that that was a great opportunity for our community to learn. And some of the things that we've been doing right as the pandemic was starting to be heard and talked about, but it seemed like it was at such a distance because it was in other countries and we really weren't aware that it was here in the United States yet. But at that time, there was already a lot of anti-Asian sentiment taking place because of the labeling of the past administration, calling it the Kung flu and blaming it on the Chinese, where it was as if the perception out in communities that Asians caused the pandemic. And so we wanted to combat that right away. We did a Chinese Lantern Festival in the early days of 2020 with co-sponsored with BCC International that brings Chinese students to the United States. They live here in Ann Arbor for 2 years, their junior and senior years of high school. And some of those young children were facing discrimination in the schools and in community of people telling them to go back to China and take the disease with them and comments along those lines. So we felt it was necessary to make a public statement. We created marketing materials and also did a public statement against xenophobia and racism, and making it clear that the disease, the pandemic, did not know race, that it affected everyone equally and that no particular ethnic background was to blame. So we did share those nationally with the YMCA movement. As time progressed throughout the year and the Black Lives Matter started to gain more prominence in community, and we knew that we were having a rally in June in Ann Arbor, we decided to join that in full force with our Y staff team. We were one of the few organizations that was very heavily branded in the march. And so you could actually see us with Black Lives Matter and Y staff written on our shirts and on our posters as we also were in the protest. We felt that was very important to do, to not just verbally make a statement, but to also show action. And the work that we did this year in community, when we were at 15 different locations in Washtenaw County, we tried very importantly to pick areas that were not currently being served. There's a lot of great work going on with food gatherers and other feeders in our community, but we wanted to see what other areas we could go into that weren't currently receiving distribution in their community. And so we had the opportunity to meet many others, marginalized populations that were in need as part of our equity work. And as it's gone on and continued during the summer, we had some youth conversations, as we always try to do. So it's not adults trying to decide what youth need, but instead adults asking youth, what would you like us to provide you with? And we had a wonderful conversation with a group of LGBTQ plus teens who said that they wanted us to create a swim program that was specifically for them, because teens often feel awkward and challenged with body image as it is. And then you add some of the discrimination that's out in community directed at LGBTQ youth in particular. And they stated that they wanted a private private time to be able to swim as their authentic selves and to wear the swim attire that they identified with. And so we created a program, Out to Swim. Unfortunately, we have yet been able to implement that because of the restrictions in regards to what we can do in our natatorium, but we co-created and developed that program with the LGBTQ Resource Network. That's a national ERG with the YMCA, and also with the teens in our community and our staff. So as soon as we're allowed to be able to do big group activities in the pool, we're going to have these Out to Swim nights on Friday evenings for both adults and youth, like families and friends of the LGBTQ community, to be able to enjoy that private time in the pool. So just some of the equity work.
That is beautiful, Tony. And I'm wondering, I want to push a little more on this. You both have laid out this beautiful array of ideas and of dreamings and of actions. And I want to dig a little more on, was there pushback to any of those? And either from the people holding the purse strings or from other folks in your community? And how have you responded?
You want to go first, Pam? Or? So yes, I had one of my major donors, a very significant donor, who reached out to me to have a conversation about how visible and vocal we were, because we also issued, public statements on Black Lives Matter, and our LGBTQ work is very vocal. I was in the newspaper, and the gentleman in question is a more conservative individual and older, but with a huge and loving heart. And he did express to me privately, was I afraid that this might turn some more conservative individuals off to the YMCA by being so outspoken, by being so visible. And I shared with him that I didn't feel it would, because we weren't politicizing it. It wasn't about politics. It was about humanity. It was about human rights. It wasn't Republican. It wasn't Democrat. It wasn't partisan in any way. It was simply the statement that at the Y, we love everyone. We love all of our children, and we accept our children just the way they are. And how can that not be Christian? How can that not be loving and accepted by everyone? And so he continued to contribute. And we also, literally, the Monday that we did the Black Lives Matter protest, and then I think a day later, I issued my public statement on Black Lives Matter and racial and social justice. That Friday, I received a phone call from another conservative, older Caucasian male donor. And he and his family established for us a $500,000 endowment, because they knew how financially struggling we are. We, needless to say, we lost $1.5 million, last year, with all of the closures and everything along those lines. And the commentary and the conversation we had was, he felt that we were doing true mission work by serving those most in need, by serving those most marginalized, that is what the Y should be doing. And sure, having a fitness center is great, and a pool and all of that, but that is not what motivated him to give. What motivated him to give was he wanted to see the type of work that we have been doing in regards to community outreach, to serving basic needs, to reaching out to those communities that are often neglected, that is what he wanted to see us continue to do in the future, and that was why he was funding it. And so, sure, your board's always going to worry a little when you do something that is outside the norm, when you do something that is outspoken and has a level of risk to it, or that you could receive negative PR on. But my mind has always been, if you do the right thing, if you do the loving thing, you will be rewarded for it. And it's a matter of convincing your boards that sometimes they can't see how are you going to be able to continue to fund this. This doesn't generate any revenue. What it does do is move people emotionally, and it opens up their hearts, and you do generate revenue. It's just not the way that sometimes people are thinking about it. It's in the contributions. So though we lost millions in programmatic revenue, over $1 million, and in membership revenue, our contributions increased this year. And so that managed to sustain us. Our donations, our grants managed to sustain us through the crisis, because we were doing the right thing.
For us, because we had been working in the equity space for a few years, it was a different kind. To get the ball rolling, we first had started talking about poverty and recognizing intergenerational poverty. And the Alice report, which is a report that we did on the standard of living in Washtenaw County, it's actually throughout the state. We did one for every county. I could not get people to believe that there was poverty here. No, and so much to the point of where I bought giant billboards in the community on 94 and 23 that said "Poverty here?" ? Yes. To try to get that conversation started. And as far as pushback in the community, I had a call that said, "Well, you have a billboard on 94." And I said, yes, we do. Do you want to know more about our work? I'm so excited to talk to you about it and how you can get involved in fighting poverty and fighting racism. And they were like, well, the art fair is in 2 weeks and we get 250,000 people visiting. And I don't think that's a message we want to send. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because poverty doesn't stop during the 2 weeks of art fair. So let's talk more about that, And so we engaged in a polite conversation. But that to me showed me early on the divide that was happening within community. And then when we talked about us being the most, one of the most economically segregated counties in the country, and if you are born, poor, you are more likely to stay that way. And if you do gain assets, you're not likely to keep those assets and build upon those assets. And that led us to this talk and conversation about race. And we did have, people saying, well, this is kind of bold, what happens if we lose donors? And I was like, I don't think it's money that we want. And there will be new donors. And so sometimes as a leader, you have to just kind of be bold and go with your gut, because integrity is doing the right thing, even though it's not the easiest thing. And in your belief, as you carry that forward, the work that you do is genuine and it is transparent and people understand it and see it, and then they want to be a part of it. I think for us during the Equity Summit, which was in February of last year, it was a snow day, it was a blizzard, it was anything that could happen on that day. We had 400 people signed up to come to an Equity Summit, and yet still they came. We didn't cancel it, we moved ahead and still they came. And at that point, to me, that spoke to me about the will of the people, and moving, and how important this work was, and that we were not going to stop. And it did indeed open up many new funding streams for us. After we raised that first $1 million for COVID relief, 78% of those dollars went out to marginalized communities. And we made a specific intent to make sure dollars were distributed to nonprofit agencies led by people of color. And we were able, we picked up notice and recognition from MPHI, the Racial Diversity Task Force, at a state level, and we were awarded $500,000 to bring back based on our equity work. So this work has leveraged new resources for our community. So
thank you, Pam and Tony, for making that explicit. Tony, what were you going to add there?
Oh, that we were also one of the organizations that benefited from that. There are so few CEOs of color leading nonprofit organizations, and in our community as well. It's not just a national statistic that having representation matters. I believe that strongly in all levels of organizations, and that it's not enough to have staff of color on front lines. It is important to have staff of color in leadership, because oftentimes it is the leader that influences the culture of an organization. And to be able to have true cultural change that embraces diversity and inclusion, the individual needs to have that competency skill set. Not to say that Caucasians can't have that competency skill set, they can, but when it comes from a person of color, you can often make more movement in the community because you have more trust in the community. When we held an open forum in Ypsilanti Township prior to COVID hitting, we wanted to ask community what their perceptions of our organization had been in the past, what their perception of our organization was now, and what we could do better as an organization moving forward. And it was made very loud and clear to us, very vocal, by older individuals in the room who had experienced the segregationist past of our organization, of the YMCA, when they were not permitted to swim in the Y, when they were not permitted to come in, and even 13 years ago when this building was first built, prior to my being CEO, that even when they came in here, they did not feel welcome because our staff was not diverse. Representation matters. Having an equity stance matters. And it's not enough just to say it, you have to show it. And I would truly believe that once your staff teams and your board of directors, most importantly, your board of directors, starts to mirror the communities that you want to serve, especially those most marginalized, that's when you truly start to have change and impact.
If we have a time for one more statement, is that fine, Hillary?
Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, collaboratively, it was so important for us, all of those new pathways and alliances and partnerships that had been laid through our equity work became critical during when COVID hit, because we were already aligned with the Ministers Alliance in Ypsilanti. We were already aligned with different neighborhood groups. And so we were able to get PPE out to community in a very quick and expedient manner. We were able to connect in a much different way, so much so that when we distributed those dollars, 19 organizations were brand new to United Way. We had never partnered with them before. And so I think that was a testament to how deep and how willing we were to do things differently. If they weren't a 501c3, we found a fiduciary agent that was willing to work with them. And people were like, "Ooh, 19, what about the risk?" And it was like, it's a risk we're willing to take. And only one out of those brand new organizations that we worked with returned any dollars to us from not being able to carry it out. So it was a risk well worth taking. And those were BIPOC-led agencies, BIPOC-led neighborhood organizations. We worked deep at a much deeper level than we ever had before with the Hispanic and Latin communities. And so with those kinds of collaborations and with those new networks, I think we were able to make a much greater impact in the community by working together. And none of the work that United Way does is possible without the community, without the donors, without the nonprofits. And when we say by 2030, we want to live in a community where your zip code doesn't determine your opportunity in life, the only way that we're going to be able to do that is through collaboration and new partnerships and sharing power and building power in community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's the perfect segue into a time of conversation and hearing from you all what you've heard, what's inspired you, how you are reflecting on this past year. So I want to invite you, if you're able, now is a great time to turn on your video